The Last Song of Orion, 7. Through the fractured sky of Orion, 7, twin moons cast their pale light over a world on the brink of annihilation. The soft hum of an ancient melody, a Lumari hymn of unity, floated through the air, barely audible over the distant cacophony of plasma fire and collapsing structures. It was a song sung by the Lumari to comfort their young, now drowned beneath the weight of war. Captain Elias Trent, call sign Spectre, stood motionless in the shattered remains of a Lumari temple. His black combat armor, dulled with gray dust, reflected the faint glow of the fires spreading across the city. He adjusted his visor, scanning for signs of life amid the ruins. The melody tugged at something deep within him, a memory he couldn't quite place. Spectre, the voice of his squad leader barked through his comms. Clear the sector. Evacuations in 15. No stragglers. Elias didn't respond. His sharp eyes locked onto a faint movement beneath a fallen crystalline arch. The temple's spire, once a symbol of Lumari peace, now lay scattered in jagged shards. He moved cautiously, his enhanced visor cycling through thermal imaging. There, beneath the debris, a flicker of warmth. Small, faint, but alive. Kneeling, Elias whispered a command to his suit. Hydraulic servos whirred softly as he shifted the rubble aside, revealing a hidden alcove. From the shadows emerged a pair of luminous blue eyes, wide with fear and glistening with tears. They belonged to a Lumari girl, no older than 7 by their species standards. Her silvery skin shimmered faintly under the flickering emergency lights, marred with dirt and shallow cuts. "It's okay," Elias said gently, switching to the Lumari's basic dialect, a language all human soldiers were trained in. "I'm here to help." The girl flinched but didn't flee. Her translucent head fins trembled in a pattern he recognized as fear. She clutched a small, shattered piece of what appeared to be a musical instrument, likely the source of the song he had heard earlier. "Spectre, status update," the comm crackled again. This time, the urgency in the voice was palpable. "Xyrix patrols are sweeping your sector. If you're not out in 5, you're staying behind." Elias didn't hesitate. "Hold evac," he replied. "I've got a survivor." The motion tracker on his HUD beeped sharply, "Hostiles inbound." The Xyrix were relentless hunters, their organic armor and serpentine forms blending seamlessly into the chaos of Orion, 7. They were closing in fast. Elias extended his hand. "You need to come with me. Now." The girl hesitated, her wide eyes darting between him and the distant sound of Xyrix claws scraping against stone. Finally, clutching the broken instrument tightly, she placed her delicate hand in his armored one. It was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the burning city. As they emerged from the ruins, the first plasma bolt sizzled past, striking the ground inches from Elias's boots. Without a word, he scooped the girl into his arms and sprinted for cover. The Xyrix patrol had spotted them. "Command, I need extraction support." Elias shouted, firing over his shoulder with his plasma rifle. "Negative, Spectre. No resources. You're on your own." Elias's jaw tightened. His training kicked in, every move calculated. He zigzagged through the rubble, using the broken cityscape to outmaneuver the Xyrix. The girl clung to him, her small frame trembling but silent. She watched with wide-eyed amazement as he fought, throwing flashbang grenades that disoriented the sensitive Xyrix and taking down pursuers with precise, controlled bursts of fire. As they neared the evac zone, the girl whispered something in Lumari, a word his translator couldn't fully process but carried the weight of gratitude. He responded with a faint smile, though his focus remained on keeping them alive. At the landing zone, a small group of Lumari refugees was being loaded onto the last transport. Elias carefully set the girl down among them. "You'll be safe now," he told her, crouching to meet her gaze. She grabbed his hand again, her fins twitching in an erratic rhythm that Elias recognized as fear mixed with hope. "I have to go," he said softly. Others need help too. The girl's voice cracked as she spoke, her words trembling. Will you come back? Elias hesitated, then placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. Stay strong, little one. As the transport doors closed, she watched him through the small viewport, her wide blue eyes locked on him until the ship rose into the smoke-filled sky. Elias turned back toward the battlefield, his resolve unwavering. The melody she had played earlier lingered in his mind, a fragile reminder of what was worth fighting for. A name in the shadows. The endless hum of the Lumari Central Archive resonated softly as Sarah Lix's translucent fins twitched with determination. At 19 cycles old, Sarah was no longer the frightened child cradled in the arms of a strange human soldier. She had grown into a poised and respected junior diplomat for her people, though her heart carried the weight of an unsolved mystery. Before her glowed the archive's interface, a holographic display filled with fragmented records and incomplete reports. For years, in the quiet moments between diplomatic missions, Sarah had searched for one name, the human soldier who had saved her life. She didn't know his face, his rank, or even his real name, but the symbol etched into his black armor haunted her, a ghost with the number 3. Her search had turned up almost nothing. Most human military records from the Xyrix Wars were destroyed in a massive cyber attack shortly after the conflict ended. The Ghost Squad, the mysterious unit she believed her rescuer belonged to, was little more than a myth, a whisper among survivors and soldiers alike. Still chasing shadows, a voice asked, pulling her from her thoughts. Sarah turned to see Tane, her closest friend and fellow diplomat, holding a tray of glowing data crystals. The council session starts in an hour. If they catch you poking around restricted files again, it won't look good. Tane's voice carried a hint of concern, but Sarah ignored it, her fins fluttering as she inserted another data crystal into the reader. The screen flickered, displaying blurry images and scattered text from the evacuation of Orion 7. I know he's out there, Tane, she said, her voice steady but firm. He didn't just save me, he fought like no one else. The Xyrix were unstoppable until the humans arrived. And you think you'll find him by digging through corrupted files? Tane asked, crossing his arms. It's been over a decade. Thousands of humans fought that day. But only one carried me out of the ruins, Sarah replied, her blue eyes narrowing as she scanned the report. Only one used the tactics the Xyrix called dishonorable, shadow tactics, ambushes, and tricks that confused them. That's how he fought. The holographic display shifted, revealing a partially redacted report. Sarah leaned closer, her fins stiffening as she read the details. It described a squad of human operatives known as Ghost Squad, infamous for their unconventional methods. Her heart raced as she traced the text with her finger. This is it, she whispered. The unit matches his symbol. They operated during the evacuation of Orion 7. Ghost Squad? Tane asked, peering over her shoulder. Sounds more like a story to scare children than a real unit. Sarah's fingers flew across the interface, pulling up a list of names, but most of them were blacked out. The report ended abruptly with a notice, data corrupted during Xyrix cyber offensive. Further details unavailable. Frustration welled up inside her, but she refused to give in. He risked everything to save me, Tane. When everyone else ran, he stayed. I can't forget that. Tane sighed, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're chasing a ghost, Sarah. You've already done more than anyone else would. Maybe it's time to move on. Before she could respond, a new alert popped up on the archive interface, upcoming Human Lumari Diplomatic Summit, attendee list updated. Sarah's fins twitched with curiosity as she opened the file. A delegation of human veterans and dignitaries was scheduled to arrive on Lumari Prime for a historic alliance summit. Scanning the list, her breath caught when she saw a name, Elias Trent. The name meant nothing to her, but his title did, former captain, Ghost Squad. Her heart pounded as she stared at the words, a flood of memories rushing back. The symbol on his armor. The way he had shielded her with his own body. The calm reassurance in his voice. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's coming to Lamari Prime." Tane raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously thinking of—" "I'll volunteer for the summit team," she interrupted, her fins fluttering with determination. "I'll finally meet him and thank him for saving my life." Tane shook his head, a mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration in his expression. "You're stubborn, Sarah. I'll give you that." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. Her focus was on the screen, on the name that had suddenly made her years of searching worthwhile. This was her chance to close the chapter that had defined her life for so long. For the first time since that fateful day on Orion 7, she felt like she was on the verge of something extraordinary. The soldier in the crowd. The grand hall of Lamari Prime shimmered with soft bioluminescent light, the walls pulsing faintly in sync with the quiet hum of Lamari ceremonial music. Delegates from dozens of allied worlds mingled, their voices blending into a chorus of diplomatic pleasantries. Humans stood out among the crowd, their rigid military uniforms a stark contrast to the flowing, organic garments of the alien species. Sarah Lix stood near the edge of the gathering, her fins twitching nervously. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, imagining how he might react. Yet now that she was here, her courage wavered. She scanned the room, searching for the name she had repeated in her mind since she first found it, Elias Trent. It was strange to attach a name to the ghost-like figure who had carried her through the ruins all those years ago. Her chest tightened at the thought of seeing him again, wondering if he would even remember her. "Still sure about this?" Tane's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood beside her, his expression equal parts skepticism and support. "He might not be the person you're expecting." "He doesn't have to be," Sarah replied, her gaze fixed on the crowd. "I just need to know." As she moved through the throng of dignitaries, her translator chip buzzed softly in her ear, catching fragments of human conversations. Words like alliance and war protocols floated past, but her focus remained unshaken. Her fins stiffened when she spotted him. Elias Trent stood near a group of human veterans, his tall frame unmistakable in the crowd. His black military coat bore the insignia of Ghost Squad, a spectral figure with the number 3. Though older than she remembered, his presence was unchanged, calm, sharp, and composed. His dark eyes scanned the room with the precision of a soldier who never stopped assessing his surroundings. For a moment, Sarah froze. The memory of being cradled in his arms, shielded from the chaos of Orion 7, surged back like a tidal wave. She had spent years chasing this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Gathering her courage, she approached him. Her silvery skin caught the faint glow of the hall's light as she stopped a few steps away, waiting for him to notice her. When his eyes finally met hers, she felt the air shift. There was no immediate recognition in his gaze, but there was a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps. "Captain Trent," she began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm Sarah Lix. I believe we've met before." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the measured calm of someone used to unexpected encounters. "Have we?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "It was 8 years ago, on Orion 7, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "You pulled me from the ruins during the Xyrix invasion. You carried me to safety." For a moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then his eyes widened slightly, and she saw the gears turning as the memory surfaced. "The Lamari girl," he said softly, almost to himself. "You were clutching some kind of instrument." "A Lyra shell," Sarah confirmed, her fins fluttering. "It was my mother's." Elias's gaze softened, and for the first time, the stern lines of his face eased into something warmer. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," he admitted. You were so small. I wasn't sure if you even survived after that day. I survived because of you, Sarah said, her voice firm but laced with emotion. I've been searching for you ever since, trying to find a way to thank you. You don't owe me anything, Elias replied, shaking his head. I was just doing my job. Sarah's fins stiffened slightly at his response. It wasn't just a job to me, she said. You risked everything to save me when you didn't have to. You gave me a chance to live. Elias fell silent, his gaze drifting to the floor as if he were replaying the chaos of that day. I've always wondered what happened to the people we saved, he said quietly. It's rare to know how things turned out. Well, now you know, Sarah said, a small smile breaking through her serious demeanor. I became a diplomat. I worked to ensure the kind of violence I saw that day never happens again. Elias nodded, his respect for her evident in his expression. You've done well, Sarah. Far better than most would after what you went through. Before she could respond, the room's lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the summit's formal proceedings. Delegates began moving toward the central stage, where speeches would soon be made. Looks like duty calls, Elias said, his tone shifting back to the professional calm of a soldier. But it was good to see you again, Sarah. Truly. Wait, she said quickly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. Would you, after this, meet me for a moment? There's more I need to say. He hesitated, then gave her a small nod. I'll find you. As Elias disappeared into the crowd, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had been brief, but it was enough to reignite the determination that had carried her this far. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of clarity. The soldier she had searched for was no longer a ghost. He was real, and her journey wasn't over yet. Echoes of the past. The summit had concluded hours ago, yet the towering spires of Lumari Prime's Great Hall still glowed faintly under the twin moons. Delegates had dispersed to their quarters, but Sarah Lix stood near the edge of the reflection pools, her translucent fins shimmering in the cool night air. The water mirrored the bioluminescent flora surrounding the plaza, casting ethereal patterns across her silvery skin. She clutched a small lyra shell pendant in her hand, its surface worn smooth from years of anxious handling. It was all she had left from that fateful day on Orion 7, a fragile reminder of a world lost but not forgotten. Her heart pounded as footsteps approached from behind. You're persistent, came Elias Trent's voice, calm but tinged with curiosity. Sarah turned to see him standing a few feet away, his imposing figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the plaza lights. He had shed his formal military coat, now wearing a simpler uniform that somehow made him appear more human and less the untouchable legend she had envisioned. I wasn't sure you'd come, she admitted, her voice soft. I'm a man of my word, Elias replied, stepping closer. You said there was more you needed to say. Sarah hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spent years rehearsing this conversation in her mind, yet now that it was happening, the words felt clumsy and inadequate. You changed everything for me, she began, her fins twitching nervously. Before you came, I thought the Zyrex would destroy everything. They were unstoppable, relentless, but then you appeared, and for the first time, I saw hope. Not just for me, but for all of us. Elias's expression softened, though he remained quiet, letting her speak. I've spent years trying to understand why you did it, Sarah continued, her voice steadying. Why you risked your life for a child you didn't even know. It wasn't your mission. You could have left me behind, but you didn't. Why? Elias's gaze drifted to the reflection pools, his face shadowed with memories. Because leaving you behind wasn't an option, he said simply. I've seen what happens when we ignore the small things, the lives that seem insignificant in the grand scheme. But they're not. Every life matters. His words hung in the air, carrying a weight that made Sarah's heart ache. She had always imagined him as a larger-than-life figure, driven by duty or heroism. But now, standing before her, he was just a man who had made a choice that had shaped both their lives. "I thought about you, too," Elias admitted after a pause. "Not often, I couldn't let myself. But every now and then, I'd wonder if you made it. If you found a way to rebuild." Sarah's fins fluttered in quiet acknowledgement. "I did. Because of you." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. Finally, Sarah reached into her satchel and pulled out a data crystal. She held it out to him, her hand trembling slightly. "What's this?" Elias asked, taking it carefully. "It's a record of everything I found about Ghost Squad," she explained. "What little is left, anyway. I thought you might want it. To remember." Elias looked at the crystal, his expression unreadable. "Most of it's gone," he said quietly. "Wiped out in the Xyrix cyber offensive. Ghost Squad isn't much more than a memory now." "But it's a memory worth keeping," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "You and your team didn't just fight. You gave people like me a chance to survive. That matters." Elias studied her for a long moment, then slipped the crystal into his pocket. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a rare note of sincerity. "I didn't expect this." Sarah smiled faintly, her nerves finally settling. "Neither did I. But I'm glad you came." As they stood there, the distant hum of the city fading into the night, Sarah felt something shift. The search that had consumed her for years, the unanswered questions that had haunted her, now felt resolved. She had found him, not the hero she had imagined, but the person who had given her hope when she needed it most. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Elias glanced up at the sky, the twin moons casting their pale light over them. "Now," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Now, we keep moving forward." Sarah nodded, her fins glowing faintly in the moonlight. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. The echoes of the past had led her here, but now it was time to create a future. The ghosts we carry. The training grounds of the Lamari diplomatic complex were a stark contrast to the serene reflection pools of the night before. The sharp hum of holographic combat simulations filled the air, blending with the rhythmic sounds of drills and commands. Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching as Elias Trent moved like a shadow through the simulated battlefield below. His movements were precise and efficient, every strike and evasion a testament to years of experience. Her mind wandered to their conversation the night before. She had finally found him, the soldier who had haunted her memories, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unsaid. As she watched him now, it was clear that Elias wasn't just carrying the legacy of Ghost Squad, he was carrying the weight of every life he had saved and lost. Elias finished the simulation, his breathing steady despite the intensity of the exercise. He glanced up, catching sight of her on the observation deck. With a faint nod, he motioned for her to join him. Sarah descended the steps, her fins fluttering slightly in the cool air. When she reached him, he handed her a bottle of water without a word, his expression unreadable. "Impressive," she said, gesturing to the now dormant simulation. "You make it look easy." "It's muscle memory," Elias replied, his voice even. "You don't forget things like this." "But you still practice," she observed. He shrugged. "Old habits die hard." They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the training grounds fading as they moved toward a quieter section of the complex. Sarah's mind raced with questions, but one pressed harder than the rest. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias stopped, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Every day," he admitted. "The people we lost, the ones we saved. They're all there, like ghosts." Sarah nodded, her own memories of Orion 7 flashing in her mind. "I've spent years trying to find you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I think part of me was searching for closure. For a way to understand what happened that day. And have you? Elias asked, turning to face her. Maybe, she replied. But I think I've also learned that some things don't need answers. Sometimes, it's enough to know that someone cared. Elias's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. You were just a kid, he said quietly. You didn't deserve to be caught in that. And yet I was, she countered. But I'm here now, and so are you. That has to mean something. He let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. It does, he said. More than you know. They continued walking, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, her work as a diplomat, his experiences training new recruits. Yet beneath the surface, an unspoken understanding lingered between them. They were two survivors, bound by a moment in time that had shaped their lives in ways neither could fully articulate. As they reached the edge of the complex, a transport ship descended in the distance, its engines humming softly. Elias paused, his gaze fixed on the ship. That's my ride, he said. Back to the fleet. Sarah felt a pang of sadness but pushed it aside. Will you come back? She asked. Maybe, he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. If the galaxy needs saving again. She laughed softly, though the weight of their parting was undeniable. Take care of yourself, Elias. You too, Sarah, he said, his tone sincere. As he boarded the transport, Sarah watched until the ship disappeared into the sky. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of closure, not because her search had ended, but because it had given her something greater, hope. The ghosts they carried would always be with them, but now they had a chance to honor those memories by moving forward. And in that, they found a kind of peace. Shadows in the stars. The Lumari night sky stretched vast and unbroken, its twin moons casting silver light over the bustling spaceport. Sarah Lix stood at the observation deck, her fins glowing faintly in the cool breeze. The transport ship carrying Elias Trent had long since vanished beyond the horizon, but her thoughts remained tethered to him, replaying their brief but profound interactions. She turned her gaze to the stars, her mind brimming with questions. What was next for him? For her. Their lives had crossed in an extraordinary way, but now they were diverging again. A soft chime from her wrist communicator broke her reverie. She tapped it, and Tane's familiar voice filled the air. Sarah, you're going to want to see this, he said, urgency in his tone. What is it? She asked, her fins twitching. Xyrix activity near the outer colonies. It's not confirmed yet, but it looks bad. Sarah's heart sank. The Xyrix, the species that had destroyed her home and countless others, were stirring again. I'll be there, she said, her voice resolute. Moments later, she was in the council chamber, where holographic displays projected unsettling images of damaged ships and fragmented distress signals. Tane was already there, along with other Lumari diplomats and human representatives. The room buzzed with tension as reports filtered in. Xyrix incursions have been confirmed in the Halyan system, a human officer announced. We've lost contact with 3 colonies. This isn't a raid, it's the start of something bigger. The Lumari delegation exchanged anxious glances, their bioluminescent fins dimming in a display of collective unease. Sarah's gaze flicked to the human representatives, searching for any sign of Elias, but he wasn't there. Do we have any idea what they're after? She asked, stepping forward. The officer shook his head. Not yet, but the pattern matches their movements from the last war. As the discussion continued, Sarah felt a growing sense of dread. The Xyrix weren't just another enemy, they were an existential threat, a force of destruction that left nothing but ruin in their wake. And this time, the galaxy might not be ready. Her communicator buzzed again, this time with a direct message from an encrypted source. She stepped out of the chamber to answer it, her fins tingling with apprehension. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. Elias, she breathed, relief and surprise washing over her. Sarah, he said, his tone serious. I'm sorry to contact you like this, but I thought you should know, Ghost Squad's being reactivated. Her fins stiffened. Reactivated? Why? The Zyrex, he said simply. They're moving faster than anyone expected. My team's already mobilizing, but we'll need all the help we can get. Why tell me this? She asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and concern. Because you understand what's at stake, Elias replied. And because I need someone I can trust. The Lamari have a way of seeing things humans often overlook. That's going to matter. Sarah's mind raced. She had spent years working to prevent another war, yet here it was, on the verge of consuming the galaxy once again. What can I do? She asked. Be our bridge, Elias said. The Lamari and the humans need to work together, and you're in a position to make that happen. We can't afford to let politics get in the way. Sarah nodded, determination solidifying in her chest. I'll do whatever it takes. Elias's expression softened slightly. I knew I could count on you. Before the call ended, Sarah felt the weight of what lay ahead. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos, but for the first time, she felt ready. She wasn't the scared child hiding in the ruins of Orion 7 anymore. She was a diplomat, a survivor, and now, a vital part of the resistance. As she returned to the chamber, the urgency of the situation was clear. The council was already debating next steps, but Sarah's voice cut through the noise. We need to act, she said, her tone firm. Not just as allies, but as one united front. The Zyrex won't wait for us to get our politics in order. If we hesitate, we lose. The room fell silent, her words carrying a weight that transcended rank or species. For the first time, Sarah felt the eyes of both Lamari and humans on her, not as a survivor but as a leader. In the back of her mind, she thought of Elias and the soldiers of Ghost Squad preparing for the battles to come. The shadows of the past had returned, but this time, they weren't fighting alone. The ghosts that rise. The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly before the Allied fleet as they assembled near the Lamari homeworld, the largest gathering of military and diplomatic forces since the Zyrex War. Sarah Lix stood on the observation deck of the Lamari flagship, her silvery skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her translucent fins fluttered with quiet determination as she watched ships arrive from across the galaxy, their engines leaving streaks of brilliance in the void. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in since that day on Orion 7. The galaxy stood united, but it was fragile, a coalition bound by the shared fear of annihilation. And now, all eyes were on her to help bridge the gap between the Lamari and the humans. Impressive, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Elias Trent, now clad in the distinctive black combat armor of Ghost Squad, the ghostly emblem prominent on his shoulder. His presence was steadying, a reminder of the bond they shared, forged in the chaos of war and solidified through shared purpose. It is, she replied, gesturing toward the fleet. But impressive isn't enough. The Zyrex won't be impressed. Elias nodded, his expression grim. No, they won't. But that's not why we're here. Then why? Sarah asked, her voice carrying the weight of the question. To remind them what happens when we fight together, he said simply. The Zyrex don't understand unity. They rely on fear and chaos to divide us. That's how they win. But this, he gestured to the fleet, this is something they can't comprehend. Sarah's fins fluttered as she absorbed his words. She had spent so long searching for answers, for closure, and now she realized that the answers didn't matter. What mattered was the fight ahead, the chance to ensure that no one else would endure what she had as a child. A sharp chime interrupted their conversation, signaling an incoming briefing. The Lumari Council chamber aboard the flagship buzzed with tension as representatives from every allied faction gathered around a massive holographic display. The Xyrix fleet had been detected near the Halyan system, their movements eerily coordinated and precise. "Their numbers are staggering," a human admiral said, his voice heavy with concern. "We've never seen them this organized before." "They've adapted," Elias said, stepping forward. His voice was calm but firm, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "But so have we. They expect us to fight like we did before, scattered, isolated, unsure. That's their mistake." "And what do you propose, Captain?" a Lumari elder asked, his tone skeptical. Elias glanced at Sarah, then back to the council. "We hit them where it hurts. Their command ships. Take out their leaders, and the rest will falter. Ghost Squad can infiltrate their fleet and disable their command network." "That's a suicide mission," another representative said. "It's also our best shot," Sarah interjected, her voice cutting through the murmur of dissent. "The Xyrix thrive on overwhelming force. If we can disrupt their coordination, we level the playing field." Elias gave her a subtle nod of approval. "We're not asking for a miracle," he added. "Just a chance. Let us do what we do best." After a tense pause, the council relented. The plan was set into motion, and the fleet mobilized. Sarah felt the weight of their collective hope pressing down on her as the preparations unfolded. Hours later, as the Allied fleet entered the Halyan system, the vastness of the Xyrix armada came into view. Their ships were jagged and organic, moving like a single living organism. It was a sight designed to inspire terror, but Sarah felt only resolve. On the comms, Elias's voice came through, steady and reassuring. "Ghost Squad is moving into position. Keep them distracted for as long as you can." Sarah stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the console as the battle began. The Allied fleet surged forward, their combined firepower lighting up the void. The Xyrix responded in kind, their weapons cutting through the darkness with deadly precision. As the chaos unfolded, Sarah's mind drifted to Elias and his team. They were out there, somewhere in the heart of the enemy fleet, risking everything to give the galaxy a fighting chance. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Just as the Allied forces began to falter, a massive explosion rippled through the Xyrix fleet. One of their command ships had been destroyed, followed by another moments later. The enemy's formations began to break apart, their coordination unraveling. On the comms, Elias's voice crackled through. "Targets neutralized. Ghost Squad is en route back to the fleet." Cheers erupted across the bridge, but Sarah's relief was tempered by the knowledge that the fight wasn't over. The Xyrix were wounded, but they weren't defeated. As the Allied fleet pressed the advantage, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. They had faced the shadows of the past and emerged stronger, united by something the Xyrix could never destroy, the will to stand together. When the battle finally ended, and the Xyrix retreated into the depths of space, Sarah stood on the observation deck once more. This time, she wasn't alone. Elias joined her, his armor scorched but his presence as steady as ever. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "For now," he replied. "But there's always another fight." Sarah turned to him, her fins glowing faintly. "Then we'll fight it together." The stars stretched on, vast and infinite, but for the first time, Sarah didn't feel small. She felt ready. They had risen from the shadows, and now, they carried the light of hope into the unknown.